Welcome everyone, I'm Dale and this is Cinema Historia. An ex-war vet, the Rocky Mountains, and a high country adventure. This week we're going back to 1972 for an American Western film called Jeremiah Johnson, starring Robert Redford and Will Geer. And this is directed by Sidney Pollack. So where does our story begin this week? Well, our story begins at the Rocky Mountains in the mid-1800s. Mexican War veteran Jeremiah Johnson, played by Robert Redford, decides to take up the life of a mountain man, supporting himself in the Rocky Mountains as a trapper. Traveling downriver and stopping at JMR Trade Goods, he purchases a horse, traps, a .30 caliber Hawken rifle, and other essential supplies. Asking a local where he can hunt bear and beaver for cash money for their skins, he is told to head due west and turn left at the Rocky Mountains, and his adventure begins. Getting low on supplies, he finds his first winter difficult, with learning to hunt, fish, finding shelter, and making fires to stay warm during minus 25 below weather. While fishing, he has a run-in with Paints His Shirt Red, a chief of the Crow tribe who keeps his distance and leaves peacefully. The next day he finds the frozen body of Hatchet Jack, clutching to a .50 caliber Hawken rifle and leaving a note, giving the rifle to the man who finds his corpse. With his new rifle, Johnson inadvertently disrupts the grizzly bear hunt of elderly Chris Lapp, nicknamed Bear Claw, played by Will Geer. Giving him food and shelter, Bear Claw teaches Johnson the skills required to survive, giving him confidence to set off on his own once more. Coming across the cabin and a family recently attacked by Blackfoot warriors, Johnson adopts a surviving young boy, which he nicknames Caleb. Johnson and Caleb together come across mountain man Del Gue, buried up to his neck in sand and robbed by Blackfeet. Soon after, the traveling three are taken in as guests by the Christianized Flatheads after giving gifts of horses and blankets. According to Flathead custom, to maintain his honor, the chief must give his guest an even greater gift than given. The chief gives his daughter Swan to be Johnson's bride. Though reluctant, they wed, and now Johnson, Swab, Caleb, and Gue journey once more into the wilderness. So, does Gue separate, taking his own path for adventure? Does Johnson, Swab, and Caleb slowly become a family? Or does the U.S. Army Cavalry rescue party and a stranded wagon train of settlers change the direction of our story? Partly based on a real-life trapper named John Johnson, or nicknamed Crow Killer, Crow members had murdered his wife and he swore vengeance against the whole tribe. Shooting on location, using nearly 100 locations across Utah, director Sidney Pollack mortgaged his house to supplement the Warner Brothers limited budget. Struggling with extreme weather and a tight budget, rarely were the crew able to shoot any second takes, resulting in the film taking 7.5 months to edit. With a 93% rating from the film critic Rotten Tomatoes, this film was entered at the Cannes Film Festival in 1972, being the first Western to be entered in the competition. Well done. And our trivia question this week, it's an interesting one. Was there a future superstar hiding in a root cellar in our film? Was there a future superstar hiding in a root cellar in our film? So a little more history and the answer to our trivia question coming up next. Now, since Jeremiah Johnson portrays a mountain man in our film, that's the topic of this week's history. So the Rocky Mountains were the home to the untamed, wild-free men of the fur trade known as mountain men. The industry flourished in the early 1800s when the demand for beaver pelts was at its peak. The pelts were used for expensive hats, coats, and other fashion apparel, in the eastern cities and across Europe. Up until 1822, the fur trade was controlled by the Hudson's Bay Company and the government. When the government got out of the fur business, the industry was left to anyone willing to plunge into the rather high-risk adventure. And what were a couple of things used in this adventure? Well, one was snowshoes, and the ones you see behind me are roughly around the 1930s. The snowshoe was invented to make the natural movement of walking on snow easier without sinking in. The snowshoe seems to have appeared earlier than the wheel, with the advent of the wheel being around 3500 BC and the snowshoe around 6000 BC, as proven by engravings of the Stone Age found in Norway. During several thousand years, the snowshoe was an object of prime necessity for winter hunting and trapping. The more modern-looking snowshoe that we see today, made originally from a solid piece of wood and crude binding, was called shoe ski. Invented in Central Asia some 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. North American type snowshoes were slowly adopted by Europeans during the colonialism in what later became Canada and the United States. And another thing used in this adventure, well, the Hawken rifle. Yes, the Hawken rifle is a muzzle-loading rifle that was widely used on the prairies and in the Rocky Mountains during the early frontier days. Developed in the 1820s, it became synonymous with the Plains rifle, the buffalo gun, and the fur trapper's gun. Trained by their father, the rifle was made and sold by Jacob and Samuel Hawken. Well known as riflesmiths, the brothers moved to St. Louis, Missouri at the beginning of the Rocky Mountain fur trade. To serve the needs of fur trappers, they opened a gun shop in St. Louis in 1815, where they developed their Rocky Mountain rifle. And in 1858, the shop passed over to several owners, the last being J.P. Gemmer, who closed the business and retired in 1915. Pretty cool. And the answer to our trivia question this week: was there a future superstar hiding in a root cellar in our film? Yes, and to explain, owning approximately 600 acres at the time, many of the locations for the film were shot on or near Robert Redford's property in Utah. And the little blonde girl Johnson finds hiding in the root cellar is actually future country music superstar Tanya Tucker. Her family lived in the area where the film was being shot, and she kept pestering Robert Redford to put her in the movie. Pretty cool. I'd like to give out a big thank you to my new subscribers this week. Thanks for jumping on board. And here's what Robert Redford said of the freezing cold temperatures on the shoot. We had 7 cases of frostbite, 4 of strep throat, 2 of pneumonia, and only 3 cases of brandy. Now that's roughing it for you. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope to see you back next week.
Hello.